If you show this picture to someone and ask them what it is, it's unlikely that anyone would say two seats at different heights. That be this picture. With this one, most people would probably say that's a seesaw. Even if you followed up with, well yeah, that means two seats at different heights, right? Most people would probably correct you and say, no, it's not that simple. The seats are connected in a special way that makes the whole thing work as something more than just two connected seats. Because we all know when we have a system and there are connected parts, changing a part affects everything else in the system too. They won't continue working as before. It's a simple idea that we all understand. Yet, very often we either don't recognize the systems in our daily lives or we fail to understand the impact of our actions on these systems. Because usually that bar in the middle that connects the two seats isn't very obvious. So we end up hurting ourselves or others, and then maybe we realize, oh, what I did actually affected everything. Like that one time when we were kids and once our side of the seesaw was down, we decided we were tired and wanted to get off, and half a second later, our friend on the other side screamed in pain and we realized, whoops, I shouldn't have gotten off. In this video, we are going to talk about some ways that our decisions can affect the systems around us. The truth is, most of the time we don't fully understand these consequences until we experience them firsthand, like having a free fall from the top of the seesaw. But many of these consequences are similar. If you are holding a tray with two heavy containers and someone picks up one of them, the same thing as the seesaw is gonna happen, and if you are not ready for it, you will lose the balance of the tray. Here too, experiencing it will help us understand it better, but if the experience we already had on the seesaw was supplemented with some explanation, it could help us to see the similarities and not spill the bowl of hot soup on the guests. One of these patterns is we make a change in the system which makes it lose its balance. Then the system works hard to regain some balance again, and in this process, a bunch of bigger changes happen in the system too. Let me give a very physical example. Take a hot cup of water for example. This is a system because there are lots of water molecules interacting with each other. They bump into each other, move each other, and transfer energy between themselves. This cup is in balance right now because all molecules have relatively the same amount of energy. But if I drop an ice cube inside the cup, it's not in balance anymore. There is now a chunk of water molecules in there that have a different temperature. So now the system works hard to restore the balance. There will be lots of molecule movements and energy transfers until all molecules again have the same amount of energy and temperature. Why do we care? Because if we could predict what change in the system would lose its balance such that when the system works its way back to a balanced state, some other changes that we wanted happen too, then we can change the system however we like. Back to daily life. Most economic challenges are of this nature. For example, we want some product to be cheaper, but we can't force its sellers to sell it for cheap. So we should change some other parts of the system and disrupt its balance, so when it's becoming balanced again, this product would also become cheaper. For example, we could produce or import a lot of that product, so just like how the energy got distributed between the new water molecules in the previous system, the value of this product would also spread out in this financial system and the price per item would come down. Or another similar challenge that governments have to deal with would be how can we print more money and inject it somewhere in the system so its new balanced state would result in higher production instead of inflation and temporary wealth for a small group of people. But this type of systems thinking is not limited to economics. Another example of where it applies is our living environment or our ecosystem. For example, let's say there is an island with lots of farming going on, but the farms have too many pests. The current ecosystem of the island is in balance. There is a food chain where animals eat each other, some of them eat the plants and some of them help the plants grow. We eat some of them and also plant new crops so some others would eat and everyone's living their lives. Now if I could add a new animal to this ecosystem and disrupt its balance so that on the way back there would be fewer insects and worms on the farms, then that's a win, because I've made farming easier. And this is something New Zealand did 150 years ago. They took 200 magpies from Australia to eat the pests they wanted to get rid of, and their prediction of how the ecosystem would regain its balance was correct. Magpies would eat some of the insects and there weren't that many animals who'd eat magpies. And now magpies are part of their country's ecosystem and everyone's living in this new balanced state. This prediction is obviously easier said than done, especially when dealing with a system with humans, because human behavior is a bit less predictable than animals. One of the famous examples is the story of how Britain wanted to reduce the number of snakes in Delhi when it was still under British rule. They invited all citizens to kill their snakes and give their dead bodies for a cash reward. This is a big change in the system because just like the magpie's example where the insects suddenly had a new hunter, here the snakes got a new hunter, humans. But their prediction of how it would play out wasn't accurate because people started breeding snakes so they could then kill them and get cash for it. The problem got worse. If they could, the magpies would breed more worms too, but they couldn't, so the prediction worked out. But humans do weird things. A few years ago there was this institute in the US that would give some cash to people who had recovered from COVID and donated blood because they could use their blood plasma to help those with weaker immune systems who are struggling with the virus. They later realized that some people were intentionally trying to catch COVID so they could recover and donate blood. Now, although examples and stories of large systems and government actions are more fun, these systems exist in all sizes. An example of a smaller size system is the human body. It has lots of organs that are all working together in balance. It's been a very old question for people how they can change something so the new balance would be the body they want. My body takes in some energy every day and burns a certain amount. It has some amount of muscles, fat and other stuff. Right now it's balanced, but I want to know which part of the system should be changed so on the way back to the new balance some fat would be lost. One way would be reducing the energy intake, another way would be changing where the energy comes from, another one would be increasing the burn rate or other ways. This is an example of a change in a system that people have been working on for a couple of 100 years because every body is a different system and maintains its balance in a different way. It's possible for you to lose fat by reducing the energy intake and for me to actually build more fat. And that's the first pattern. A change in the system makes it lose its balance, and while the system works to regain the balance, some other components change too. Whoever can predict a way back to balance accurately can make whatever change they want to the system. The second issue is the metrics in the system that we care about. Let's take a country as an example of a system. The employment rate in this system is an important metric to us, as is any crime rate. These two sample metrics are very quantitative, you can report them with a number. But there are also other metrics that we still care about but can't easily come up with a number for. For example, in the same hypothetical country, one metric might be how clean the streets are. This is also important, but not as easy to measure. Now, what's important about these metrics is that they are always a continuum. While we generally find it easier to label things and prefer to draw a line on the spectrum to say this is good and this is bad, in reality the metrics don't work like a switch. They gradually move over time. Now let's put our desire to simplify things by calling them good and bad aside for a second and examine another feature we have. We care so much more about whether we can defend our decisions than whether those decisions are actually right or wrong. In other words, what really matters to us is whether someone can catch us out or not. Now, before anyone comments that I'm wrong and calls me out, let me defend myself. There have been so many social experiments about this, and every time it's been shown that if we can stay anonymous and come up with a plausible defense statement for ourselves, we lie and we cheat and we steal. What matters to us is just not being seen as a liar or a cheater or a thief. For example, in one of these experiments, they give a bunch of court files to people and ask them to consider all evidence and material and decide whether the suspect is guilty or not. And they observe that they make many mistakes, ignore many details, don't pay attention to missing files, and are lazy. For other groups, they tell them in addition to the final verdict, you should also explain to a group of people how you came up with your decision. Suddenly, there are fewer errors, more attention, and better verdicts. Because unlike before, my laziness will not remain hidden anymore. Before, I could have missed many details and ignored stuff, and I thought even if I end up wrong, no one would know if I was being lazy or if I actually considered everything and just came to a different conclusion. But now it's different. If I'm supposed to explain, then it'll be obvious if I don't pay attention. Or in another experiment, they give some math and logic puzzles to the students of a university as a test, and they check how many questions they can solve in the given time and give them some cash for each question. After running the same test with many groups of students, they reach an average that they are fairly confident about. They know a random group of students in this university can solve, say, 4 out of 10 questions in this test. Maybe some people more, some people less, but that's been the average. Then they change the settings for the new groups and tell them, we don't need your answer sheets. Once the time is up, please throw your papers in that shredder at the door, which they had jammed but the students didn't know, and report to the person sitting outside how many problems you solved. Suddenly, the average of these new groups goes up and they report 6 questions solved on average. We know the real average is still 4. We have brought in enough people to be confident of that. But it's now 6 because every student thinks, there are so many people here, even if I say I solved a few more, it's not gonna change any of their stats. But because they all think that, it actually changes all of the numbers. This feature of ours makes us keep moving the systems we are in towards that bad label, because no one can say it was our fault that the system became bad. Because this single decision I made didn't make it bad, it just moved it a tiny bit, especially when people can't see us. So I don't leader when I'm with my friends, I don't leader when I'm with my family, I don't leader when people are around me, but if I'm alone, I quickly come up with a good excuse for myself like, oh, there is so much trash in this city, this little tissue is not gonna hurt anyone. Oh, there is so much stealing in this country, me not paying for my petrol bonds doesn't hurt anyone. Oh, there are so many rich people who don't pay nearly enough taxes, me not paying this couple grand is not gonna make a difference. The first thing we should all learn and remind ourselves of is that we are one component of a large system. Every decision we make has an impact on the system, and it moves it a tiny bit towards being better or worse according to the metrics we care about. If any of the metrics we care about are bad right now, every single person who contributed to it and I are responsible for its entire badness. The responsibility doesn't get distributed. If 10 of us move the system to a bad state, we are not each 1/10 responsible. We are all fully responsible for all of it. If I work in an organization and I don't do my job, I don't answer the phone, I don't feel like some falls in front of me so I throw them out, I am responsible for all of the faults and inefficiencies of this country's workforce, even though I'm one of thousands. The same thing applies to the positive side too. If I'm a third grade teacher who is kind to the students and always take my time answering their questions and do everything I can, the credit for all of the academic achievements of this country goes to me as well, even if I've only had a few thousand students over the 30 years. Because it was me and a few thousand other teachers like me who collectively moved the system towards the good label. So we all get all of the credit. And let me clarify, I'm not saying employees should do their jobs or teachers should be kind to kids. I'm just saying whatever metric that applies to me and I care about, I am fully responsible for its current state. Maybe someone says the city being clean is not an important metric to me. That's fine. We are not talking about what metrics should be important for everyone. We are just saying for whatever metric I care about, I should figure out the impact of my decisions on it and see myself responsible for all of it, not a tiny fraction of it. If I were to summarize the second issue in one sentence, I could say, is my decision doable for everyone? If it is, to find its impact on the system, I should assume everyone's going to do it. Whatever happens then is the impact of me doing it. Speaking of systems made of people, there is a side point here worth mentioning. Modern life, which is mostly influenced by Western culture, is very focused on seeing the components of the system independently. Today, we learn much more than a few decades ago that all humans are separate beings and their actions are completely their own choices, independent from others. There have been some interesting experiments on the differences of the Western and Eastern cultures on this in the last 15 years. In one experiment, they bring lots of people from Western countries like the US and lots of Eastern countries like Japan and ask them to finish this sentence in 20 different ways. I am ... Western participants' responses are significantly more about themselves compared to Eastern participants. Like I am happy, I am successful, I am tall. But Eastern participants' sentences are more like I am a wife, I am a father, I am a good friend. They see themselves more as part of systems and in relation to others around them. And it's not just about the personal lives and the small systems around them. These are completely different mindsets. These brains work differently. In another experiment, they show everyone a square with a line inside it. Then they give them another larger square without the line and tell them we want to draw a similar line inside this square too. You can choose if you want to draw the line with the same length as it was, or to draw it with the same ratio to the rest of the square and scale its length like the entire picture has been zoomed in. Again, those Eastern participants who choose to keep the same ratio do it significantly better than the Western participants who want to do the same. Because that brain and that mindset sees the relationship of the objects before seeing two separate drawings. Once again, I should clarify that this is not an argument for either of these mindsets being better or worse than another. There is no such thing. They are just different ways of seeing the world. We talked a lot about the benefits of seeing the systems in this video, but to be fair, the individual components are important too. For example, many of the individual human rights that Western countries are paying more and more attention to every day are born out of exactly this difference in mindsets. Because if we were to see everyone as just a part of a large system, it would be easy to kill many people, imprison many more, don't give them any rights just because they are not contributing positively to the metrics we care about. And if they don't mean anything outside the system, well, why not? And who's to say what metrics are important and which are not? It's not always as easy as having a clean city. So it's actually the mindset of seeing them independently that's prioritizing some of their personal needs and rights over maintaining the system metrics. In conclusion, I want to say it'll probably help all of us if we always try to identify the systems we are in and predict the impact of our actions in them. Because it's not like if we don't see the system or don't care about our impact on it, the system would just go away. It won't. The system is there and we just hurt ourselves or others around us. Like getting off the seesaw when our side is at the lowest height and our friends at the top. And once we have identified the system and predicted the impacts, it's important to both keep ourselves accountable for it and to remind others around us about it too. Especially when there are people around us who have been moving the system's metrics towards those good labels for years. Metrics that we care about too, but because they are one of thousands, they have never been noticed. We can notice them.